Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
When you think you could build a city the size of Cardiff for construction workers that have killed themselves by suicide in the last 10 years, that's a scary statistic. You know, like, you've got to sign paperwork for health and safety. You've got to, like, working from heights, working with gypsum, you know, working with heavy machinery, all these kind of things that you've got to tick off and sign these boxes for. There's nothing in any of those handbooks, shall we say, that pinpoint anything towards mental health. I'm really honest and open and straightforward with my customers, and I, on a day-to-day basis, have conversations with people about my mental health struggles and why I'm at where I'm at. And, you know, when people ask me why I'm doing what I'm doing, I give them the whole story.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. We are the home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle, and we are back as we draw to the end of 2024. I've had a really busy few weeks, and I hope you've been okay these last few weeks that I've been away. Lots of things to keep on top of. I had a bit of time away with the family, which is really pleasant time, but always good to sort of get back into things, get back into some conversations and get some cracking podcasts going once again with Mental Health Monday, all the way through until the end of the year and then into 2025. If you've got recommendations for guests for the podcast for next year, more than happy to hear from you. Drop me an email. I'll put a link to my email in the podcast notes so that you can get involved there. More than happy to talk about, well, you know me, 1,000,001 different mental health subjects, stories, angles, whatever it is. Let's keep the conversation moving here on Mental Health Monday in 2025. I'm going to talk today about an issue which has come up on the podcast before, but actually there's a new way of framing this which I thought was a real eye-opener and wanted to bring it to your attention because it's about the construction sector. Now, we mentioned this just even a few episodes ago, talking about areas in society where there are clear issues around mental health. The construction sector being one, because traditionally it has been a place where people who work around the construction sector have been much more prone to poor mental health, much more prone to suicide and suicidal thoughts. Some new data out on this very subject says, check this, 7,000 construction workers have taken their lives in the last 10 years. Now, this is the Lost City project, which is highlighting how big an issue it is. What they're saying is that those 7,000 construction workers in that period could have built 150,000 homes, 80 schools, and 3 hospitals, the equivalent of losing a city. That's incredible, isn't it, when you think about the scale? But, you know, when we talk about people and those numbers, they add up, don't they? And when you frame it around the construction industry and look at what could have been built by these individuals, it just goes to show the scale of the problem. Some of the stats around this are really, you know, deeply concerning as well. Members of the construction sector are 4 times more likely to die by suicide. 65% say they suffer with financial stress. 64% have turned to things like drugs and alcohol to try and self-medicate. And actually, absences within the construction sector themselves cost nearly £3 billion a year. The construction industry is massive. There's 2 million plus people who work in it. But the numbers around mental health within it are so incredibly poor. But there are people who are starting to take steps, who are doing things in that space to really try and make a difference. As part of the conversation this week, we're going to be hearing from Gavin Crane, who's from the organisation Band of Builders. But first up, though, I wanted to hear from a builder, someone who works within the sector and has experience of poor mental health, to get a sense of what's going on here. What's the real story? So Joe Baker, top guy, is from Second City Screed Ltd, and he's here to tell us about his journey, his story. Then we'll widen it out and look about what we can do next.
So my experience from a mental health point of view is I've obviously, as most people have experienced a positive state of mental health and also a poor state of mental health. So just over 3 years ago, I was in a really dark place and attempted suicide to the point where I really needed to shout for help and support. I didn't think it was the right thing to do at the time, if that makes any sense at all. But when I started reaching out and talking about what was going on, obviously I saw then that there was a lot of help out there for me to be able to recover and start my first footsteps in my recovery journey, really.
And I think I'm right in saying that that falls in line with you stepping into the construction sector. I mean, I don't know whether
I'm falling into, mate, to be honest.
And I didn't know whether I'm guessing when you go into the construction sector, one of the big selling points isn't anything to do with some of these stats and facts that I've mentioned, that it's not celebrated in any way, shape, or form. At what point did you become aware that actually the construction industry itself had its own issues around mental health?
So I think I was only sort of really became aware. Obviously, mental health is at the forefront of my mind anyway, whilst being on this journey. But I think that really the statistical side of things, when I started talking to people that are in that sector of the industry and you know, like people, podcasts and, you know, information that you're getting from these sources, when you start really delving into it and you start understanding the figures, how scary it is. But I would have said probably maybe even halfway into my journey, really. So I was kind of late on into the journey, bearing in mind, obviously, like I said, it's at the forefront of my mind. You don't understand really until people start talking about these statistics and the actual figures that are written down on paper.
Now you're in the industry and you sort of see it on the day-to-day and you understand sort of the comings and goings and the issues that people face. What for you is it? If we're going to say, what is it that means that you're 4 times more likely to die by suicide if you work within the construction industry? You know, absence is costing to the tune of £3 billion a year. What is it? What are the issues that are going on within the industry that are potentially causing some of these problems?
So in my opinion, I think the issues are that it's not talked about enough. I think, you know, and this is purely my experience, so obviously everyone is different, but I don't do a great deal of commercial work. I do a lot more domestic, but the commercial work that I have carried out on sites, when I visited a site, there's absolutely nothing, you know, like you've got to sign paperwork for health and safety. You've got to, like, working from heights, working with gypsum, you know, working with heavy machinery, all these kind of things that you've got to tick off and sign these boxes for. There's nothing in any of those handbooks, shall we say, that pinpoint anything towards mental health. You know, there's nothing to say, you know, have you had feelings, you know, suicidal thoughts or feelings in the last 6 months? You know, there's been, in my experience, there's been nothing there for that, for people to kind of even present themselves in a manner where they might be feeling that way, where if there was potentially a piece of paperwork when you're coming onto a site, it might pinpoint you in the right direction, or signpost potentially. I think that's the biggest issue, is there's no understanding of people from the get-go to then have the conversation with someone. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. And when the stats are spelled out, 7,000 construction suicides in the last 10 years, 4 times higher than the national average, something has to be done. Is there enough spirit within the construction sector? Is there enough sense of community within the construction sector that actually the sector is now saying, we need to look at ourselves, we need to look at what's going on within our walls to decide how we can bring these numbers down, not just by half, but even more significantly than that?
Yeah, I think there is. And I think as a community, if you like, of construction workers, then people are becoming and understanding more about what's going on in the background. And I think me certainly, and the people that I'm talking to in my circle of construction friends, if you like, we're talking about it more and getting the news out there. And I think doing things like this and really sort of advertising and marketing, and it shouldn't need to be advertised or marketed, but I think with those things, that I think it will have the right, it'll move in the right direction, basically. And we need to address this. It's a pandemic, it's a crisis, and hasn't been up until now, you know, with these movements that are happening, that, you know, it hasn't been at the forefront of people's minds, and it needs to be. You know, when you think you could build a city the size of Cardiff for construction workers that have killed themselves by suicide in the last 10 years, that's a scary statistic.
It absolutely is. Let me ask you, in terms of the work that's going on in this section, you know, this sector, and we can talk about, you know, this conversation, but that day-to-day stuff, Joe, those conversations that you would have with colleagues that can happen within building sites, Is there an environment where that can take place, or is there still that sort of cloak over the top of it, which basically says, you know what, we don't talk about this because we're working class blokes and it's just not something that we've done?
I think there's areas of that are more readily available now. However, I think it's very cliche and stigma that's surrounded by it that we as men are, from a very young age, I've just had this conversation earlier this morning, that we're taught to man up. And it's very much, like you said, cloak and dagger as such, it's covered by a cloak that whilst it's more acceptable now, there's not a safe space, I don't think, for people to talk about these issues other than doing podcasts or doing events or doing something that's specific to this. I don't think it's as widespread. If that makes any sense to you, I think we need to be making this something that is a topic of conversation when you're on site. I'm really honest and open and straightforward with my customers, and I, on a day-to-day basis, have conversations with people about my mental health struggles and why I'm at where I'm at. And, when people ask me why I'm doing what I'm doing, I give them the whole story, So I think if people are more honest and open about their experiences of mental health, then it will have a massive impact on the industry itself.
Have you ever walked onto a building site where you haven't been told about your boots and your hat and your high-vis jacket? You're wearing one now. I mean, that's just the norm, isn't it? But actually, have you ever been on a building site where someone said, oh, by the way, how are you feeling at the moment? How are the finances stacking up for you? Is that causing you concern and stress? I'm guessing one of those things happens every single time, and the other happens almost never, if not never.
You're exactly right, mate. Yeah, there's, like I said to you before, when you go onto site, there's always a handbook. So the first thing you do when you go onto site is you're walking into the site manager's office, generally a container. There's a ring binder about that fat full of health and safety guidelines of what you do and don't need to do. But there's never, when you're sat down having that conversation, you're ticking that box about what did you get up to the weekend, blah, 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 blah. There's never, ever is there a conversation of how are you feeling yourself at the moment? It's just not discussed.
What lessons do you think from your own journey and your own recovery, what worked for you that would maybe make you think, you know what, if we had more of this, or this pathway really worked for me, if we had more of that, I think people like me who might be in my situation might be more willing to open up and talk about it?
So there's a few things that help me. Relationships with loved ones, obviously, naturally. Therapy really helped me, and I think the discussions that we've been having about it not being readily available. I was very fortunate that when I sort of first started, if you like, my demise in my poor mental health, that I was working for a big corporate, completely out of construction. I was in a sales environment, but I had easy access to therapy. I had easy access to healthcare and all those other things that come with working for a big corporate. But generally speaking, in construction, everybody I certainly speak to are self-employed, and I don't think they've got that access or the funds to get this help. And I think if we can put something in place that offers that support and network for people to be able to open up and be able to go to therapy, I think that would have a massive positive effect on people's mental well-being.
And in terms of your own recovery, Joe, sounds like you're taking good strides, you're making good steps here. Where are you up to now?
Yeah, so August the 7th, just gone, I was 3 years sober. So I was an addict. There's no question about it. It's very hard for me to hear that, and it gives me goosebumps every time I say it. But I think, again, recognizing that and having the love and support around me that has helped me on my journey to recovery. Yeah, I'm not a kind of guy that's going to stand here and preach to people about drinking and doing drugs and that you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, because I think there's a right path for everybody at that time. One thing I always say to people is if you want to have the discussion and you want to speak to somebody about addiction, then I'm always here to speak to.
Brilliant stuff. Well, we wish you all the best with the ongoing journey that you've got, Joe. We're going to bring Gavin into the conversation now. Gavin Crane from Band of Builders. Gavin, thank you so much for your time. When people talk about lived experience, sometimes people don't like that phrase, but you only need to listen to Joe to hear just how crucial it is. That it's not just, oh yeah, I've heard about this. I've lived this. I'm in this sector. I know all about it. And a brilliant insight there into what's going on in the sector.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a journey that we began 4 years ago. We've taken on the mission of improving mental health in construction. It's something that we started during COVID, and we wanted to really make a difference in this area. But there's not one site or one builder's merchants that we go to where we don't come across someone that's had a friend or colleague that's died by suicide. It affects so many people. It's right. And there's a lot of work to do to make improvements in this industry.
Yeah, can I ask you about that? Just in terms of sort of the day-to-day, it's 4 times higher suicide rates than the sort of the national average, if you like. Yeah. So it must be the case, as you've hinted there, that everyone must know someone.
Yes, everyone. Just the hands that go up when we're on our construction site, if we're visiting tier 1 or like I say, to builders merchants. Try to connect with tradespeople and sole traders that won't have access to support. Everyone knows someone, everyone knows a tradie, and yeah, everyone knows someone that's died by suicide. It's shocking. It's a shocking statistic.
So when Joe was talking there about there needs to be places for people to go, the opportunities for people to reach out, I know that the work that you're doing is trying to create that space. Just give us what infrastructure is there in that space? When people talk about sole traders, that might be often a man in a van who might not see anyone else other than maybe a few elderly, clients that they've got during the day. So what's that wider structure that they can lead into if they're not part of a big corporate organization?
Exactly that. And that's where we've seen some real success in taking our message and our resources and the support that's available through vendor builders into builders merchants. Connecting with the white van man, the sole traders, self-employed, that won't have employee assistance programs or access to mental health first aiders has really been our bread and butter. Over 50% of construction is self-employed. So we can connect with those tradespeople. We can offer free counselling, telephone helplines, tech support helplines. And we've seen some real success with our tech support helpline. The most common time of day that is used is between 12 a.m. and 2 a.m. So it just shows the need is there. And the need for a 24/7 service is there. And over 30% of the people reaching out for support are a result of suicidal thoughts.
In terms of those people who do talk about the suicidal thoughts, when you sort of look into sort of the background information, are there things that they're saying about their situation which is specific to their experience within the construction sector? Or is there that other thing that's going on that they are a cohort of men who are more prone to suicide, between the ages of 35 to 60 who are probably more prone to suicide as well? So there's like a society thing, but also then there's the construction thing. So where can we, I don't want to point the finger of blame, but what can we point to in terms of the reasoning?
I think construction has some incredible pressures, more than other industries. So I know other industries like agriculture and hospitality, they have a pretty tough time as well, certainly since COVID. But you look at material costs, loneliness, working away from home, family and friends, project employment, job security. There's certainly a number of contributing factors that are leading to these shocking statistics in the construction industry.
What do you need, Gav? What do you need? What can make the difference in terms of that support, that awareness? Is it a funding thing? Is it about the sort of publicity that comes around this? What do you think that next step could be?
We want to reach as many people as possible. Obviously, we welcome people to get involved, get behind the Lost City campaign. We're on the tools. We do want to raise more funds. We want to make therapy and helplines available to every construction worker in the UK. But we currently have resources available. We just want to make sure people know that they're there and they're there to support them in their time of crisis.
You mentioned there sort of the helpline and people reaching out and those sort of late night calls. I imagine that a lot of this work, if it happens upstream, can happen in those sort of day-to-day conversations as well within those wider environments where there are more people involved as well. Site managers and senior members of staff within wider construction sites, do you think they can play a big role in this in terms of setting a culture, which means that when a young apprentice comes onto a site for the first time, that senior member of staff says, look, this is going to have to be something you're going to have to deal with in terms of this world that's happening around you. So this is what we've got in place. So you almost know from the start what's coming your way, but also when it does come your way, what weaponry you've got to sort of fight it off and to make yourself more resilient to it.
Exactly that. I think it's everyone's responsibility, right from the senior leadership teams right down to, like say, the site managers and warrants. we all need to be there and look out for each other. It's a tough industry. My background's construction, and I've spent my whole life on the tools, so I can relate to the challenges that face construction workers every day. And we need to start those conversations with everyone, and despite how tough they can be. But the design around kind of our Big Brew event, our coffee mornings that we take onto building sites, they're designed to be light touch. They're designed to be conversation starters. It's kind of that have a break, have a chat kind of moment, checking on each other. It's by just starting that conversation, reaching out to a fellow colleague who doesn't seem right, might seem off, can make the massive difference and really could make their day and turn them around.
Even when you're having those conversations, Gav, do you often find that there's still somebody who's complaining that they've got some concrete going off in the corner? They don't have time to stop, because part, and you look at the study, people worried about financial stress, builders, they're up, they're down, they're traveling, they're all, it's busy, and they're busy as well. That idea of saying you've got to make time for this is a culture shift, isn't it? Because if you've grown up, particularly if you've been through an apprenticeship and you've never had those breaks and you've never had those conversations, you're almost relearning a skill, aren't you?
100%. I think, again, it is that culture piece. We're doing a lot of work with construction colleges now. We want to support young learners into the industry, educate what stress, anxiety, depression, and all these types of things are that may present themselves in their careers. But time constraints are a big thing. And yeah, we're all under pressure. We all put ourselves under more and more pressure. Our roles and foremans and project managers put us under pressure to meet deadlines. So, but at the end of the day, we also need to make time for ourselves.
Joe, as part of the survey for the Lost City, 64% of construction workers say they've sort of self-medicated, turning to drugs and alcohol. That's the sort of stat, I guess, which you would hear and think, well, I know what that world is like. That's something which we have to nip in the bud right away.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the common misconception is with drugs and alcohol is that whilst it gives you a short-term dopamine hit and makes you feel great whilst you're feeling depressed, they're both depressants, right? So whilst you're up, when you're taking them, a day, 2 days, 3 days later, you're back in your depressed state again. And I think it's that I really had to come to terms with, that there was other coping mechanisms out there that would work more effectively for me. And I think would work more effectively for other people, but it's about teaching them and educating them.
And in terms of your work, Joe, if local colleges, apprenticeship groups came to you and said, will you come in and speak to our 16, 17-year-olds about your experiences and about what they may face when they step onto a building site, is that the sort of thing, with the guidance of people like Gavin, that you'd be prepared to do? And do you think others would be prepared to do that too, to start that culture change, and to start that culture change at a young age?
Yeah, I definitely think it needs to be started at a young age. It's something I would be more than happy to do. I'm very, very passionate about educating young people in this. And I think that's where it needs to start. What you just touched on there, you need to start this at a young age. And this needs to be an introduction format of, welcome to the construction industry. Here's some statistics. We don't want you to become a statistic of this. What can we do to try and help you manage your emotions and these things that are going to come to fruition whilst you're on site, potentially,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Gents, it's an absolutely huge issue, and I think it's one which obviously the industry will be dealing with for some years to come, but it sounds like there's a groundswell now that the industry recognises that it's an issue and actually wants to do something about it, and has got a plan that can see those numbers come down. What do you think you need now, Joe, in terms of getting that out there? Is it about sort of government support? Is it about wider conversations from a society point of view? What would really help, do you think, in terms of making the next steps?
I think government support is always probably one of the most powerful, isn't it? Let's be honest. But the NHS is the mental health, part of the NHS is the poorest funded part of the NHS. So trying to get them to make moves and ripples in that, I think, is going to be facing a bit of a losing battle, to be honest with you. But I think there needs to be something, and whether that's collective, us as construction workers, or whether there's charities that can get behind this and we can try and start to raise money, which is what we're doing now, to reinvest into the construction industry for this reason. I think that, it definitely needs to happen, and however we do it, we're going to achieve it. Just know that.
Gents, thank you so much for your time. Joe, we wish you all the best with your ongoing journey. Really
Thank you
appreciate
very
you
much.
joining us today. And Gav, the work you're doing as well with Band of Builders, we'll put links to that in the podcast notes as well so people can find out more information and make that connection, even if they're just a little bit undecided about whether or not they want to reach out to actually take a look. Just see what that website's about and the work that you're doing, and fingers crossed they'll make that connection too.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.